What bodybuilding teaches me is that every exercise under the sun has something to offer. Every single exercise. Because every exercise in its own way has different loading on different structures. So when you're comparing exercise A to exercise B, you're basically comparing two perspectives on the same thing in a way, right? So if you want to compare, hip thrusts to good mornings to RDLs, what's best to do? There is no answer to that. Every one of these exercises hits a particular part in a particular way. And I think that's the conclusion. Is just depends what you need. It's almost like, the analogy people always talk about, the tools in the tool shed. What's the job you need to accomplish? Today I decided to do the glute thrust, hip thrust machine. I already did my good mornings, did my squats, did my kneeling leg curls, and I thought about going in and doing some, lying down version of the leg curl. And then I saw that machine behind me, and I was like, man, I'll jump on this and hit the glutes as well. It's a posterior chain day. The good morning kind of took most of the points. To be honest, that is a very, very difficult exercise. You do 3 sets of 10 with that, and you're pretty much spent. Everything thereafter is just, you don't have the spark anymore. It's really, really taxing. It's taxing because it's, long range of motion. You're changing the transition between eccentric and concentric is at the biggest length. Some exercises have that, others don't. Some transitions are at the shortest point. So this one's particularly bad. It's really, really taxing. So by the time I got to, all the other stuff, I was already kind of half done. I get to the glute thrust, the hip thrust machine, and what started kind of making me think was, this is a very cheap way of hitting the glutes. If you think about all the other ways that you hit the glutes, obviously deep squats, probably the number one way to hit the glutes. Lunges, deadlifts, all the variations of pulling, all of that hits the glutes. But how many of them hit the glutes in a way where right at the end, where your hip is fully locked out, is the toughest part of the movement? It's a very unique movement in that sense. Very, very unique. And I had a really good pump. And when I think about squats, when I think about deadlifts, I don't get a pump like that. Now, that's not to say that the hip thrust can completely replace the deadlift. Far from it. It's just that if you want to hit the glutes and glutes only, and you want an exercise which is emphasizing the glutes, while all the other stuff is kind of maybe working a little bit, but it's nowhere near working like in a squat or a deadlift, then it's a good option. That you can use that tool for that job. And so at the end of my training session, I was gassed. And if you ask me to do some lunges, no. If you ask me to do some deadlifts, no. But hip thrusts, yeah, all right. Because that's just an isolation movement. It just feels like I'm not really spending a lot of points on that. You don't need to be up and about for a hip thrust. That's kind of how it occurred to me. And it's quite comfortable with that machine, like there's a belt instead of a barbell, so it doesn't hurt you as much. I mean, I didn't use a lot of plates anyway, but I had a really, really good pump. And it makes me think, right, obviously I'm going to say the squat is my favorite, and I'm always biased towards that. I think it's the most functional, the most beneficial for sports, all that stuff. That's me. But does that mean I need to hate on the hip thrust? Absolutely not. Let's say you've done your whole host of exercises which you deem are more superior. You can also throw in the hip thrust and just simply do a bit more volume for the glutes. And this is the thing. This is the perspective of bodybuilding that must be appreciated, is that they have 100 different ways of looking at the human body. Whereas maybe powerlifting and maybe strongman, they've segmented the body in way less, right? So it's kind of like the push, the pull, all that kind of stuff. The bodybuilding's like, nah, man, there's 100 different ways of doing a barbell press or a dumbbell press. There's 100 different angles you can use the cables for your back. There's so much variation. And as soon as you start talking about variation and thinking about the West Side Boys and some of the people in those circles, you kind of think to yourself, well, if variation is the key, then how do you talk about variation or talk about bodybuilding? And this is where exercises like the hip thrust have a place, absolutely have a place. Ever since doing that, I feel like my glutes have been hit from a different angle. My hip extension has been hit from a different angle. And if you get better at that, of course you're going to add something to your overall performance. It's never going to be a detriment. So in the spirit of this variation talk, do it. Why not? So today was my hamstring day. I call it the hamstring day, but it's a lot more than that. It's lower back, it's glutes, it's basically hip extension. Yesterday I did knee heavy, so squatty stuff, namely the hack squats. Spent a lot of my points there. Today I just wanted to do completely different, which is, the glutes. The glutes don't really, some of our conversations from yesterday would indicate that my glutes were working a bit during the hack squats as well, but nowhere near were they the limiting factor for that exercise. For the hip thrust, absolutely they are the limiting factor. It's just a, carpet bombing approach. You do all these different exercises and you kind of like go, is this good or bad in terms of standards? And it's sometimes hard to work out what standards, what standard you need to be, whereabouts you need to be. But at least he opens up the conversation of, should I be doing more or should I be doing less? Weight, reps, sets. Is my performance in this particular exercise good? Do I need to improve it? Is this a weakness? And when you have that approach, then you start to kind of, formulate a list of exercises, maybe two lists. On the left-hand side, you have the exercises that you're good at. On the right-hand side, the exercises that you're bad at. And the ones that you're bad at kind of stick out a little bit more because that's kind of the stuff you need to be working on. For instance, I'll tell you, my right hamstring when I'm doing those leg curls is much weaker. It's 2 or 3 reps short of the left one. And so that's a, unilateral weakness that I have. And so I think about that, right? And so that's important to know, right? You know where you're limited at. Whether you're going to actively treat that or not, that's up to you. But the point is you start to develop a list of the things that you're weak at. And so instead of you thinking to yourself, man, which muscle fiber do I need to hit in order for me to be a better squatter? Which muscle? Nah, man. Do a whole stack of exercises and just work out what exercises you're not good at. And just go from there. I think it's a nice way of training. And, if you're in the gym, there's so many different machines you can do to manipulate some of these parameters, right? I am training hip extension every single day. Every single day because I'm squatting every single day. When I deadlift, hip extension. But this hip thrust business is just different, man. In the shortest portion of that glute contraction, the weight is the heaviest. And that's not like what it is in the squat. In the squat, when you're kind of like in that stretched position, let's say in the ATG position and the 90-degree squat, that's where the heaviest torque curve is. But with the hip thrust, right at the end, the lockout is very difficult. That's when you're fighting the most. So it just changes a little bit and it enforces that muscle tissue to behave a little bit different and to adapt. And if you're talking about stimulus, that's a really good way to approach it, man. Just throw the whole kitchen sink at it, man, and let the body work something out. And then that way you create some sort of movement in that homeostasis rather. You force change biologically, and some of these weird exercises that you would have never thought about, just do it, man. Do it and see how you go. Maybe even progress it over the next few weeks. And then find something else. Hop on that. Appreciate you guys. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out.